Welcome to On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsome and I'm here to break down UFC 290, a stacked pay-per-view. It's International Fight Week. We've got two championship fights as well in the featherweight division and the flyweight division. It's a stacked card. I'm looking forward to watching the event, but first breaking it all down. But just before we get into the breakdowns, as always, there is going to be a Base AI recap from our UFC prediction software from last weekend's event at UFC Vegas 76, which includes, in my opinion, one of the best AI prediction that has been provided from Base AI onto the MMA Play 365 website since the launch of Base AI. So it's an absolute gem. Make sure you check that out if you are interested in the AI, in the UFC prediction software. It's in its own Base AI playlist on our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/MMA Play 365. But now it's time to get into the breakdowns. Of course, we start with the main event, with the UFC Featherweight Championship title on the line between Alexander Volkanovski and Yair Rodriguez. So, of course, when fights are announced, a lot of people, especially myself, you get those first thoughts, those initial thoughts before looking in and analysing the fight. And when this fight was announced, I thought, it's a good fight. Yair Rodriguez is the interim champion. Alexander Volkanovski, of course, the champion, the pound for pound number one, just coming off that loss where he stepped up in weight at 155 pounds to fight Islam Makhachev in what was a super close fight that some people thought Volkanovski won. So my initial thoughts on this is, look, it's a good fight, but Volkanovski should just run through Yair like he's been running through pretty much everybody else in the division. But actually, the more I looked into this fight, the more tape I watched, the more I analysed it, I actually think it's going to be much closer than what a lot of people are giving it credit for. I think Yair Rodriguez is going to be more competitive than a lot of people think. And look, you can go to the Volkanovski fight and the Makhachev fight and say, look, Volkanovski gave Makhachev the hardest fight that he's ever had. Again, like I've already said, arguably, some people thought that Volkanovski won that fight, but it was a completely different fight. It was in a different weight class to start with, and Makhachev is not the type of fighter that Yair Rodriguez is. Now, I'm not saying Yair Rodriguez is better than Makhachev because, that's simply not the case. It's just a different stylistic fight. And as we say all the time, styles make fights. So I think with Yair Rodriguez, look, this isn't the Yair Rodriguez that fought Frankie Edgar, for example. So a lot of things in regards to the style with Volkanovski, I think the wrestling could play a factor here. But like I said, it's not the Yair that, got stuck under Frankie Edgar and couldn't move. This is a much more matured version of Yair Rodriguez, a much developed version of Rodriguez. And he's a completely different fighter. So I do think the wrestling could be there for Volkanovski. I do think takedowns could happen. But look at what happened when Josh Emmett got on top of Yair Rodriguez. Look at Josh Emmett and Ilia Topuria. Topuria, he absolutely smashed Josh Emmett, but he didn't get him out of there. And Yair Rodriguez not only got Emmett out of there, he got him out of there, really. So this is what I mean. I just think it's a completely different Yair Rodriguez. Now, with Rodriguez, a lot of the advantages that Volkanovski has against a lot of fighters, with him being shorter and smaller for the featherweight division, is speed and movement. But Yair's game is completely, surrounded by speed, movement, elusivity. From a striking perspective, is Volkanovski a better technical striker? Maybe. But I think it's close. Yair Rodriguez is a very technical striker, and he's been the only fighter, in my opinion, that's given Max Holloway a real run for his money, aside from Alexander Volkanovski. And again, not many people outside of Volkanovski have, been that competitive with Holloway recently. So I think that Rodriguez is a fighter that is the interim champion for a reason. I think he's in this spot for a reason. I think Volkanovski, movement in and out of range, I think where he's really going to get at Yair Rodriguez is inside of that boxing range. I think calf kicks are going to be there for Volkanovski. I think if he mixes the wrestling up as well, I'm not saying that Yair Rodriguez is going to come out here and beat Volkanovski necessarily. All I'm saying is I just think it's going to be much closer than a lot of people think. I think it's going to be one of Volkanovski's tougher fights. I think that it's more competitive, or going to be more competitive than the odds suggest. I do think at this point, picking Yair Rodriguez to beat Alexander Volkanovski is tough to do. It's hard to pick against Volkanovski considering the fighter that he is. Like I said, I just think Yair Rodriguez is going to make this fight very competitive. I think if it goes to a decision, a lot of people are assuming that Volkanovski is going to win a clear decision. I think Yair Rodriguez could take a couple of rounds, and then if a couple of other rounds are close, normally that indicates that the champion wins that close decision. But, it's going to be close in my opinion. I don't think Volkanovski is going to go in there, run through Yair, light him up, and just make this look easy. I think it's going to be competitive. Yair Rodriguez has got the striking, the speed, and the movement to make it tougher for Volkanovski, tougher than some of Volkanovski's previous opponents have made it for him. I think if Volkanovski does get on top of Yair, I think Yair can, work from bottom or potentially get back up to his feet and just make this fight competitive. So, like I said, I think it's an amazing fight. I think it's going to be competitive. I think Yair Rodriguez is more live than what people and the bookies are thinking. But for the sake of the podcast and the prediction, I do have to give a pick. And I am picking Alexander Volkanovski and still the UFC featherweight champion. And in the next fight, the co-main event, the next title fight in the flyweight division, we've got Brandon Moreno versus Alexandre Pantoja 3. Now, the UFC are stating Moreno versus Pantoja 2, but these guys have fought 3 times. I am counting the Ultimate Fighter fight. I know technically that goes down as an exhibition fight, but these 2 fighters have met in the cage twice already. This will be the 3rd time. The one thing I will say, though, is it's very hard to put stock into those other 2 fights. I know Pantoja's won twice already. He submitted Moreno. Again, technically, with the professional record, Moreno's never been finished, but Pantoja in the Ultimate Fighter did finish him. However, like I've already said, it's tough to put too much stock into that because Brandon Moreno specifically is a completely different fighter now to what he was definitely back in Tough and then even in, the first professional fight that they both met in. But so's Pantoja as well. Pantoja is a fighter that it's seemingly, just like Moreno, has been around for years and years as a staple in this flyweight division, but still he is a different version and a much better version of what he has been when these 2 fighters met previously twice already. So it's a fight where they are meeting for the 3rd time, but I feel like they're both meeting really in the prime of the career. So I'm expecting a much closer competitive fight than they have been previously because I think Pantoja won pretty comfortably both those 2 previous times. This fight, I definitely think it's going to be different. I definitely think that Moreno is going to be, a fighter that Pantoja hasn't seen before and, vice versa. In regards to the styles, though, I think they're both very similar. From a striking perspective, neither base in MMA for either fighter is the striking. It's both the jiu-jitsu, but the striking's an area where they're both improved. Brandon Moreno, I think, is, at this point, maybe the more technical striker. I think he picks his shots a little bit better, is a little bit more patient. Whereas Pantoja, he can be a little bit of a bull. Whether he's going to come out as fast as what he has done in some of his previous fights and the lead up to this title fight, I'm not too sure because the fact he knows it's 5 rounds and I feel like Pantoja is a veteran at this point with good fight IQ, so I'm not sure whether he's going to come out super fast just because he knows there's an extra 2 rounds here and it's a championship fight as well. But for me, I think Pantoja's more explosive. I think he's more powerful than Brandon Moreno. Brandon Moreno, the more technical striker. So the striking's very close. Two different styles, not completely different, but, a little bit different. In regards to the wrestling, I think the wrestling of both fighters, again, is very similar. I don't think there's much of an edge in regards to the wrestling. And then when it comes to the grappling, this is the bread and butter of both fighters. And again, I think if you are going to give a very slight edge on the jiu-jitsu, you would probably side with Pantoja. Pantoja's scrambling and ability to find the back and his submission game, I think, is just slightly more advanced than Moreno's. Again, it's not by a great deal, though. I don't think Moreno, if this fight hits the mat with Pantoja on top, I don't think Moreno's going to get run over. I do think Pantoja, though, is the slightly better grappler. But I think Moreno's more of a controlled grappler, whereas Pantoja, he'll cause scrambles, he'll take a little bit more risks than what Moreno takes. So, again, when you're looking at this fight, everything just seems to be very close. Both fighters are slightly different in each discipline, but again, the overall quality of those disciplines are very similar. I just think it's going to be a super close, a super competitive fight. But I think that There's going to be plenty of grappling, plenty of scrambles, and this is where I am just leaning towards Pantoja a little bit, because Pantoja's striking, I think, is dangerous and explosive enough that's going to make Brandon Moreno just set back a little bit, just have a think about what he's doing and try and be a little bit more calculated. But whilst he's doing that, I think Pantoja could be doing some good work on the feet. And then, like I said, when it comes to the wrestling and the grappling, I think that Pantoja, even if he gets taken down, I think he's going to be more effective off his back than what Brandon Moreno would be. And in the scrambles, Pantoja just seems to come up trumps just that little bit more often. And like I said, it's a close and competitive fight, and we're literally clutching at straws here. For the sake of the podcast, again, I have to give a prediction, and my pick is going to be Alexandre Pantoja and the new UFC flyweight champion. And in the next fight, we've got the massively hyped Bo Nickal back again, this time versus Tresean Gore. And look, credit to Tresean Gore for putting his hand up and taking this fight, because he must know that this fight is really, really going to be difficult for him to win. You know, Bo Nickal's wrestling is a super high level. His grappling's getting caught up to that wrestling as well. And the striking is also catching up also. Now, Tresean Gore is more of a striker, predominant striker. He's got power. He's a slow, patient striker, though, which again, I think is going to feed into Bo Nickal. And I'm just not sure that even with the striking that Gore is going to have success here. Like, even if Gore is the better striker, which again is arguable at this point, the fact that Gore knows that the takedown, it could come at any moment, and if the wrestling does start, Gore is completely outmatched, it's going to make Gore a little bit more hesitant, and he's a relatively hesitant fighter or striker as it is. So if he's even more hesitant knowing that the wrestling's going to be coming in at some point, then yeah, I really think it's a difficult fight for Gore. There's a reason why Bo Nickal, I think the last time I looked, he was like a minus 1,500 favourite. I do expect that to hit into the minus 2,000 favourites at some point closer to, you know, the fight night. Bo Nickal, even at that line, he's going to be in a ton of parlays. People are going to play him inside the distance. People will play the submission as well. People will play the under in this fight. So I do think that the line's going to continue to get wider. I think it's that wide for a reason. I'd be absolutely shocked if Tresean Gore managed to win this fight. But again, just like any fighter in the UFC at this level with 4-ounce gloves, the puncher's chance is real. And, you know, even if Gore lands a punch, or maybe it's a knee as Bo Nickal shoots him for a takedown, those are his opportunities. It's such a low percentage probability of happening for him knocking Nickal out, a flash knockout before Nickal's even got any wrestling or grappling started. So yeah, real tough fight for Tresean Gore. I'm picking Bo Nickal to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is a fight that a lot of people have been talking about. We've got Robert Whittaker versus Dricus du Plessis. And this is a fight that when it first got announced, you know, everybody was saying, you know, Robert Whittaker's going to run through du Plessis and it's going to be easy work and he should be a massive favourite and du Plessis doesn't have a chance. But again, my initial thoughts were du Plessis might be really live here, and then when I saw the odds is around anywhere from plus 250 to plus 300, and I'm thinking to myself, well, du Plessis might be really live at those odds. But then I looked into the fight. Once I started watching tape, I really did start swinging the other way hard. Like, you look at du Plessis' fight versus Darren Till, he had a great first round, but then Darren Till did come back. Bear in mind, he took everything that du Plessis had. The referee did nearly stop the fight in round one. And yes, du Plessis did end up finishing Darren Till eventually, but I just kept in my head whilst watching tape thinking, look, if that's Robert Whittaker in that position against du Plessis, I don't think du Plessis is going to be that... Well, sorry, I don't think Whittaker's going to be that much of a better striker than du Plessis, but he is a better striker nonetheless. I think when it comes to the wrestling, I think Robert Whittaker's better there. When it comes to the grappling, does Robert Whittaker sit in that position and, you know, take like 60, 70 punches against the cage, not being able to get back up to his feet? I think the answer's no. And the cardio, the experience, the fight IQ, I just feel that everything is playing into Robert Whittaker's favour, to the point of I came out of tape thinking, well, what the hell was I thinking? Thinking du Plessis, you know, might have been live at those odds. Now, would I consider Robert Whittaker a bet at minus 400? You know, no, I do think it's a high line for a fight where, look, with everything said about Du Plessis, he has got insane athleticism. He has got good cardio, contrary to what, the broadcast team talk a lot of whilst I was watching tape. He can go 3 rounds. He does have power. He is explosive. He is very well-rounded. Like, he's a good striker, but he's also a very good wrestler, and he's a very good grappler, and he's got some good front choke submissions. So Robert Whittaker's got to mind his P's and Q's. But again, watching Du Plessis from a striking perspective, that charge forwards where it's almost like rock'em sock'em robots. Robert Whittaker's, too experienced to get caught by any of those bursts of aggression from Du Plessis, to the point where Whittaker will probably already have a counter ready for that, whether it be a check left hook or, standing his ground and stepping in with a straight right hand. I just think it's a difficult fight for Du Plessis. I think it's a fight that he's earned in regards to the step up, but him actually beating Robert Whittaker, I think, is a tough ask for him. I think Whittaker's more skilled in every area, more experienced, for a higher level of competition. And although I do think it's going to be competitive in moments, I do expect Whittaker to, win and look relatively comfortable wherever the fight goes. So for those reasons, I'm picking Robert Whittaker to win this fight. In the next fight, we've got a fight that has been rescheduled, and I'm really glad it has been rescheduled because it's a really good fight. We've got Dan Hooker versus Jalin Turner. Now, this fight was originally scheduled, I think, back in February or March. I can remember it was scheduled for whilst I was on my honeymoon, so it was around that time. So it was a few months ago. Dan Hooker pulled out, and Gamrot stepped in against Jalin Turner. Now, I was going to bet Jalin Turner versus Dan Hooker, but then obviously Gamrot stepped in. I bet Gamrot against Turner, and yeah, it played out then. Now here, Dan Hooker against Jalin Turner, it's happening again. And I think that, again, it's going to be somewhat competitive. I think it's a fight that is predominantly going to take place on the feet. I think it's going to be won and lost on the feet. And Dan Hooker, you can't write Dan Hooker off too easily from a striking perspective. It's just Jalin Turner, I feel, is going to be much quicker. He's younger. He's more athletic. I think that he's got more power. Not by a great deal, but he's got that sneaky, deceptive power. I think that Hooker maybe mixes things up a little bit. He's got more of a varied attack, shall I say, in regards to the striking, using the kicks and the knees. But overall, I think Turner's striking is not, obviously, it's not massively ahead of Dan Hooker's striking. Dan Hooker's still an elite striker, but I just think the speed and the movement of Turner is going to play a big factor in this fight. If Hooker does decide to wrestle, which he has done in some of these fights just to prove his veteranship and his fight IQ and the quality he is as a fighter, I think if he does try and take Turner down, he might get a takedown or two, but it's not going to be one of these fights where his opponent that was expecting a striking fight is going to get stuck on bottom and not be able to do anything. Turner's got sneaky good jiu-jitsu, but he's also very hard to hold down. And I do think that, you look back at the Gamrot fight, Gamrot had difficulty not only taking Turner down, but keeping him down. And that's what made the fight really close. And that's what surprised me a little bit, because that fight was closer than I thought it would be. I thought Gamrot would take him down easily, and I thought the quality of a grappler Gamrot would be able to keep Turner down quite comfortably as well. But that wasn't the case. And I think that when you look at Gamrot's qualities as a wrestler and a grappler, light years ahead of Dan Hooker there. I think Gamrot is a much better wrestler, a much better grappler. So if he was having trouble taking down and keeping down Turner, I think Hooker will as well. And this is why I kind of think the fight's going to play out on the feet. But look, I think the fight's going to be competitive in the early moments, but again, the speed, the movement, the deceptive power in the straight strikes from Turner, I think eventually is going to start wearing on Hooker, and I think that Turner's going to get him. Whether he knocks him out or whether it's a decision, I do think that Turner's going to get the win, so I'm picking Jalin Turner to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is going to be a barn burner. It's an absolutely savage fight. We've got Robbie Lawler versus Niko Price. It's going to be violent. It's going to be volatile as well. So, look, I think if any outcome of this fight, I don't think any outcome of this fight would surprise me, is what I was basically leading on to saying. So, look, with Robbie Lawler, it's difficult to know exactly what you're going to get. Like, the dude's still a killer. He had some great moments against Brian Barberena. He was eventually finished by Brian Barberena as well. And there's obviously this big concern about, the durability and being able to sustain damage and big shots. But you can say the same for Niko Price. I think Niko Price is a little less damaged, a little less miles on the clock from that perspective. But With Price, again, you can still get at him, you can still hurt him, and with the way that he fights, he's going to give you opportunities, and it's the same with Lawler as well. I think both of these fighters are going to be trying to be on the front foot, trying to be the aggressor, trying to land that knockout shot before their opponent lands the knockout shot, but in doing so, it's going to cause violent exchanges. I think that, again, the one big shot could be the one that changes the fight, and it could happen on either side. It's just like I say, when I'm looking at who's probably still got a little bit more to give, who's sustained less damage, and who's got those less miles on the clock. Like I've already said, it's Niko Price from all those perspectives. So I do think that, look, Robbie Lawler is live to win this fight because of the way I think the fight's going to play out. But when I have to pick for the sake of the podcast and give a prediction, I am siding with Niko Price just because, look, someone's got to win the fight. It's going to be a fight that I believe is going to be won and lost on the feet. I'd be shocked if there was, much wrestling or grappling in this fight. And I do think for those reasons, with, like I've already said, Price probably being able to take a little bit more damage at this point, got less miles on the clock, although he's been in some wars as well, probably just less wars than Robbie Lawler, who's been around for years and years and years. So for those reasons, reluctantly, I'm siding with Niko Price to win this fight. And talking of barn burners and violence, we've got Shannon Ross versus Jesus Aguilar. Now, I think this is, again, going to be another really volatile fight. I think it's going to be a fight where both fighters are going to believe that they've got more power than their opponent and therefore happy to sit and exchange. And I think it's going to be a fun, entertaining fight that's going to be back and forth, and both fighters are going to land some hard shots. But again, when you're looking at fighters that have probably taken less damage, fighters that probably are a little bit more durable, I do think that Jesus Aguilar is going to be that fighter in this fight. The one thing I hate with Aguilar is he's got this really good guillotine, and I don't hate the fact that he's got a good guillotine, but the problem with fighters with good guillotines is they pull guard and drop down onto the back once they've wrapped the neck up of an opponent, and if that guillotine doesn't prevail, then their opponent gets the head out, and the person that did have that good forward pressure, that momentum, and did wrap that neck up is now suddenly on the back. And I just really don't like that. I think it's one of the things that scare me when, looking at fighters and analysing fighters, and when it comes to betting fighters as well. But here, I do think that Aguilar is going to be a little bit more stoic. I think he's probably going to be more durable. I think that Shannon Ross is going to give a good account of himself. He's going to have moments in this fight for sure. But when it comes to both fighters really laying down and, sitting down on the shots, exchanging punches, I think Aguilar's probably got a little bit more power, even though Ross might have the speed advantage. I think the power of Aguilar is going to prevail here. And like I said, even if he does rock Shannon Ross or hit Shannon Ross with something hard to the point Ross decides to level change and take him down, then the guillotine option is there for Aguilar as well. So with all things considered, I'm picking Jesus Aguilar to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got the unbeaten 10-0 Yazmin Jauregui versus Denise Gomes. And again, I think this is going to be a violent fight. I think both fighters are going to want to stand and trade and try and light their opponent up. But I think that they've got different styles of striking. So Jauregui, I think, is by far the more technical striker. She's long, she's got nice straight punches, nice straight strikes. I think she's more boxing heavy though, and I think Denise Gomes is the more varied striker. But Gomes, I think she lacks the technical qualities of Jauregui, but I do think that she puts violent combinations together. I think she hits maybe a little bit harder, looking for that one hitter quitter a little bit more, but I think she's more well-rounded in regards to the striking and the variety, which I've already touched upon. I think she kicks a little bit more. I think she, likes to get into the clinch, and she's got knees and elbows. I think she just puts it together a little bit more on the feet in regards to the variety of attack. But however, even though Jauregui is more boxing heavy, I think that the striking of Jauregui, the volume, like I said, the deceptive power, the straight punches, the speed, the movement, I think all those attributes Jauregui does have an advantage in this fight. And I do think that matters here, because I believe the fight is going to be won and lost on the feet, striking. I would be surprised if look, I'm not saying there's not going to be any wrestling or grappling, but I would be very surprised if the wrestling and grappling played that much of a factor in the fight that it did determine who won and lost, whether that was a finish on the mat or whether that goes to a decision and the judges are looking at the groundwork as the more significant action that takes place in the fight. I would be shocked. So I do think the fight is going to be won and lost on the feet. And like I said, Jauregui for me, I think she's got the volume, she's got the speed, she's got the more technical strikes. I think her movement's a little bit better as well. Gomes, of course, is going to be live. We saw that in her last fight, that she can absolutely be live with that power and the varied attack. But Jauregui, like I said, for someone that's going to be a harder target to hit with the speed, with the movement, and being able to use that speed and movement from an offensive perspective as well, I think it's going to be difficult for Gomes. So for those reasons, I'm picking Yazmin Jauregui to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is an interesting fight. We've got Kamuela Kirk versus Esteban Ribovics. And Ribovics obviously fell short last time out against Loic Radzhabov. Radzhabov stepped in on short notice. There is a little bit of a concern there with Ribovics, the fact that he was beaten in the way he was. Like, it was competitive with Radzhabov. Like, you can't deny that it was competitive, to the point where I thought Ribovics might have even snuck a split decision win, but obviously he didn't. But there was a lot of competitiveness in the fight. However, what we now know of Radzhabov since then, he fought a couple of weeks ago. He was completely pieced up on the feet by Mateusz Rebecki, who is known more for his wrestling and grappling. And then, of course, Rebecki did get Radzhabov down in some moments, completely rolled on him on the mat as well, eventually finished him in the second round. So the way that Rebecki beat Radzhabov, and the fact that Ribovics was much more competitive, and Radzhabov tires as well. He really does tire the longer the fights go on, whereas Radzhabov had some good moments in the later moments in the fight. Those moments you would probably assume that Ribovics might take over the longer the fight goes on. So there is some cause for concern for Ribovics, but he is also a very dangerous striker. He's got power, he comes out fast, he comes out hard, he will try and overwhelm his opponents with, crazy volume and power in those early moments in the fights. Whereas Kirk, on the other hand, Kirk's a much different fighter. He's much calmer, he's more composed. I think his striking's a little bit more technical as well. He obviously just doesn't have the power and explosiveness that Ribovics has, but still, Kirk's a decent striker. I think Kirk mixes it up a little bit more on the feet. When things do get quite close, he'll happily tie up, get the Muay Thai plum clinch, look to land knees to the body and to the head as well. But again, here you've got a calmer technical striker versus a real powerhouse. Even though Ribovics doesn't look like a powerhouse with his frame, he definitely has some insane power. So you've got two different versions of strikers here. Now, when it comes to the wrestling and the grappling, Ribovics as a grappler, he's decent. He's also tricky to deal with. Like, he's got a real good Kimura, which he'll either hit on his opponents or use it to sweep. And he did it against Radzhabov time and time again, and Radzhabov just could not get a read on it at all. And Ribovics did eventually, well, not eventually, but he did sweep and reverse positions multiple times. The thing is with Kirk's a good Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, so for Ribovics to hit this Kimura and start hitting the sweeps and reversals, I just don't think it's going to work the same on Kirk to what it did against Loic Radzhabov. And then when it comes to the wrestling, this is where I think Kirk's got an advantage, because Ribovics, even on the regional scene, he gets taken down way too much. And fair enough to him, like I said, he's got the tricky grappling game with the Kimura, the sweeps and reversals, and being able to get back up to his feet, and even potentially submitting off his back with a Kimura as well. But the fact that he does get taken down against much lower level of competition than what Kamuela Kirk is a concern. The concern back on the other side for Kirk is the wrestling. Do you really trust him to use it? He seems like he's got a good wrestling game, and of course he's got a good grappling game, but he doesn't really wrestle as much as what you'd like him to. So, like I said, it's a really interesting fight from both sides. I am leaning more towards Kamuela Kirk, though. I think there might be a storm to weather in the early moments in this fight, but Kirk's been in some wars, and I don't think he gets too overwhelmed. And if Ribovics gets respect back on him from his opponent, we saw that in his Contender Series fight from Thomas Paul. Paul started landing some hard shots to match Ribovics, and Ribovics' forward pressure and aggression stopped instantly, and the fight became more technical. So I think that Kirk's got the ability to make the fight go this way. And if Kirk wrestles, I think he could be really successful. If he doesn't wrestle, it's going to be a striking fight, which is going to be more close, more competitive. Ribovics is going to have his moments where he could potentially knock Kirk out, but ultimately it's going to be a really close fight. It just depends whether Kirk does decide to go down the wrestling and grappling route. If he does, I think it'll suit him better. If he doesn't, then yeah, he's going to be liable to be hit with something hard, maybe knocked out. But for the sake of the pick and the prediction, I'm picking Kamuela Kirk to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Vitor Petrino versus Marcin Prachnio. I think this is going to be a really difficult fight for Prachnio. I'm being honest. Like, Petrino's debut against Anton Turkalj was a very good debut. Anton Turkalj, I think, is better than what a lot of people give him credit for. And Petrino went into that fight being the big powerhouse striker that's got insane power, knock you out with both hands, aggression, durability, and just almost, a nightmare to deal with how much forward pressure, aggression, and how much he tries to overwhelm his opponents with that power. But then in the Turkalj fight, we saw a wrestling game of Petrino. We saw a grappling game. Petrino landed 7 takedowns. We saw him be able to take down a good fighter, a good, well-rounded and put together fighter. And sure, he didn't look like a grappling ace or a grappling phenom, but he did a decent job and was threatening. So we saw a completely different side of Petrino's game. And even from a defensive perspective, look, Petrino got taken down 5 times by Turkalj. That was supposed to be Turkalj's path to victory in the fight, or at least it was the path of least resistance for Turkalj. But Petrino was reversing positions, getting back up to his feet. So again, even from the defensive perspective, we saw a completely different element of Petrino's game. Against Marcin Prachnio, I don't think that Prachnio is going to have the wrestling or grappling qualities of Anton Turkalj. So I think Petrino is probably going to be the better wrestler and grappler in this fight from both an offensive and defensive perspective. And I definitely think he's going to be the more dangerous striker. Now, Prachnio, he does have those odd fights where he's a little bit inconsistent with his performance, I think, is what I'm leading on to saying. Like, some fights he will get run through, but then some fights he'll win when you expect him to lose. So Prachnio does have something to offer in this fight, and Petrino has definitely got to mind his P's and Q's. Prachnio's more experienced, fought a better level of competition, so he's got those things going for him. But I just think Petrino is going to hit too hard. Both hands. I think his aggression is going to match Prachnio's, because I think Prachnio will come out quite aggressive, but I think that Prachnio is going to get the respect of Petrino's going to get the respect of Prachnio very early on in this fight. I think Prachnio might go into a little bit of a shell, and Petrino will just come forwards and either land bombs or maybe even decide to take Prachnio down and, ground and pound or look for a submission. So I think it's a tough fight for Prachnio, and I'm picking Vitor Petrino to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Jimmy Crute versus Alonzo Menefield 2. So both of these have fought previously. This is a rematch, and they fought to a majority draw last time out. Now, the reason it was a draw was due to a point deduction from Alonzo Menefield, who would have likely won the fight should he have not had that point deduction. It was for a fence grab. And look, credit to Marc Goddard, he didn't even warn Alonzo Menefield. It was a fence grab that affected a takedown, and he instantly took a point. I love to see it. Now, it's at that point, though, I said would have likely won without it, because if Jimmy Crute had got that takedown, it could have ended up in a submission. It could have ended up in a lot of top control time. We don't know, because it didn't happen. So, but outside of that point deduction, if the point deduction just wasn't there from, a general perspective, then Alonzo Menefield would have won the fight. But it was a crazy fight, and I am glad they're rerunning it, because it was super fun to watch. Jimmy Crute coming back off his knee surgery, finally fully fit, and he was standing his ground and striking with Menefield. And look, it was a really good, fun back and forth exchange where we're watching both fighters empty the gas tank. But then Jimmy Crute did start to use his wrestling, and he got some good top control time, got some good grappling on Alonzo Menefield, and showed that Crute is clearly the better wrestler and grappler in this fight. But what Alonzo Menefield showed is that he is the fighter with insane power, better cardio, in my opinion. I think that he looked more fresher out the two, going late in that fight. And Jimmy Crute is available to be hit. He's liable to be hit. He's there to be hit with the big punches. So here you've literally got a fight that we've already seen. We saw 3 rounds of it. We saw Jimmy Crute absolutely battered and, almost knocked out. And Marc Goddard could not have been far from calling that fight then as well. But then we've also seen Crute come back from those knockouts, be able to take Alonzo Menafield down easily, grapple him, roll on him easily. So we've literally seen the fight already, and both fighters have got clear advantages over each other. So when it comes to predicting which way this fight is going to go, I believe it all depends on Jimmy Crute. I think if Crute stands there again and wants to stand and trade with Alonzo Menafield, I do think Menafield gets him out this time. Menafield wasn't far from getting him out last time. I do think he completes the job if Crute stands there and decides to stand and strike. But I just don't think Crute's going to do that considering how hurt he was last time. I think it's going to maybe make Crute more wrestling heavy in this fight, get on top of Alonzo Menafield, maybe not rush positions, because Alonzo Menafield was escaping some of those positions early on, but I do think Crute was rushing the positions on the mat and losing position because of it, because he wasn't patient enough. I think if he's more patient, solidifies position a little bit more, I think Crute will have more success in this fight. And the more success he has top control, being patient, the less cardio he's going to use from the wrestling perspective. If Alonzo Menafield does make Crute shoot plenty of takedowns in this fight and makes him work for each takedown, I think Menafield's cardio is going to, surpass Crute's from that perspective. And the longer the fight goes on, the more Menafield will come back into it. So, it's a fight that's highly volatile. We've seen it before. It was a crazy-ass fight. Both fighters got clear advantages over each other. But again, with the podcast, the prediction, the pick, I am going to be siding with Jimmy Crute. So I'm picking Jimmy Crute to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Cameron Saaiman versus Terence Mitchell. Terence Mitchell stepping in on short notice to fight Saaiman, who I believe was fighting Christian Rodriguez. That would have been an absolute banger of a fight. But instead, the UFC have signed Terence Mitchell, who is an Ultimate Fighter alum, has been around for years. And I think this is an absolutely terrible fight for Terence Mitchell. Yes, he's likely fought the better level of competition. Yes, he's got more experience and he's been around the game much longer. He's older, more long in the tooth. But I just don't think that he's got enough here to really cause Cameron Saaiman serious problems. I think it's actually the other way around. I think Saaiman is the younger fighter. I think he's going to be the quicker fighter, the fighter with more volume, more explosivity. I think he's the fighter that's going to have more power here as well. And I think that Mitchell, where he tries to take this fight, if he stands and strikes with Saaiman, I think Saaiman knocks him out. If Mitchell does try to go to the mat with Saaiman, that might be where he has more success or as much success as he possibly can in this fight. But Saaiman's still young, he's still developing and improving, and that aspect of his game in regards to the defensive wrestling, defensive grappling are the areas Saaiman needs to improve on. But is Terence Mitchell the fighter that's going to really expose Saaiman, even though Saaiman will be making developments from fight to fight? I just don't believe it is. Like I said, I think Saaiman's going to be much quicker, much more elusive. I think he's going to hit Mitchell with more volume and more power in that volume as well. I think if Mitchell's shooting for takedowns, it could be desperation takedowns, which Saaiman should see come in, be able to sprawl, get back up to his feet, start lighting Mitchell up again. It's a tough fight for Mitchell, so I'm picking Cameron Saaiman to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got the newcomer making his UFC debut on short notice, Edgar Chairez versus Tatsuro Taira, the super prospect. Taira was actually booked to fight Clayton Rodriguez either last week or the week before, and obviously Rodriguez missed weight, and unfortunately I think he wasn't clear to fight, but he didn't fight. And anyway, Taira did want a rebooking quite quickly. We'd already cut the weight, he was ready to fight, and the UFC have put him on UFC 290, a pay-per-view card, again a card that does suit somebody like Taira that needs more eyes on him, because like I said, he's a super prospect, a hyped prospect. Everybody's talking about him. But I actually think that the UFC have made a really good fight here bringing Chairez in, because Chairez is not an easy fighter to run through. He's like a mini Alex Pereira if you look at him, obviously in the flyweight division. That's why I've said mini. But he just looks hard. He's tough. He's got hard strikes. He's well-rounded. He's a good striker. He's a good grappler. So Taira, I don't think is going to be in this fight to just completely run through him. I do think Taira wins the fight. Spoiler alert. But I just don't think that it's going to be as easy as what some people think, and again, what the bookies suggest. I think Tyra's like a minus 900 favourite. And I think Chairez is going, especially in the early moments in this fight, I think it's going to be super competitive. But again, do I think Tyra falls short against Chairez anywhere? Probably not. I think that Tyra might be making a mistake if he stands in front of Chairez and just strikes for too long. I do think Chairez, like I say, he's very big for this division. Stocky, powerful, muscular. He's got a good variety with his kicks, his punches, and everything he throws. Doesn't have a ton of wind-up, but he just hits hard. So I think Tyra's got to mind his P's and Q's from that perspective. And although Chairez doesn't look too easy to take down and he does have a good scrambling ability, I think this is where Tyra is going to really show his worth in this fight, because I do think Tyra is going to be able to get Chairez down. I don't think Chairez is going to be able to scramble out of bad positions against Tyra, and if he does overly scramble, I think he could potentially show his back or make a mistake for Tyra to get in a good position to finish him on the mat. And ultimately, I'm kind of leaning that's where it's going to go. Even if the finish doesn't come, I think there's going to be a takedown in at least one takedown in each round from Tyra to be able to, really take away from where Chairez is best and dangerous and where Tyra's best, and also just be able to just control those positions, be dangerous, threaten with submissions, and tire Chairez out. So although I do think it's going to be competitive in the early moments, and I think Chairez, if Chairez comes out in here and knocks Tyra out, me personally, I wouldn't be that shocked. But I do think that Tyra is a level above, or levels above, in the wrestling and grappling here, and that's where he's going to shine in this fight. I think he does get his game plan going, and I think he is able to roll on Chairez, especially the longer the fight goes on. So for those reasons, I'm picking Tatsuro Tyra to win this fight. And talking of super prospects, hyped up prospects, we've got Jack Della Maddalena fighting Josiah Harrell on short notice. This fight was only announced yesterday, I believe, or last night. So again, from the fight placement perspective, I'm sure it's not going to be the first fight of the night, but I don't know where it's going to be placed, and that's the latest fight that got added. So this is the final breakdown of the podcast. Now, Jack Della Maddalena was supposed to fight Sean Brady. I thought that was an amazing fight. Jack Della Maddalena opened at around minus 180. The money came in on Brady. It actually flipped in some places, so Jack Maddalena did end up like a plus 100 plus 100 underdog at some bookies, but then the day after, Sean Brady pulled out. So I was actually really interested in betting Jack Della Maddalena at plus money, or even as a pick'em, or even probably up to like minus 125 against Sean Brady. I thought it was a really good matchup for Maddalena, but of course Brady's pulled out and the UFC have brought in Josiah Harrell. And it's disappointing that they've brought in Harrell with how deep the welterweight division is, with that many good fighters and plenty of fighters. The fact that the UFC have had to sign somebody like Harrell coming into the UFC on short notice, making the UFC debut, I just don't think that should have happened. Someone should have stepped up against Maddalena. So I'm not necessarily saying that it's the UFC's fault, but a fighter should have stepped up to fight Jack Della Maddalena. It's UFC 290, International Fight Week, big fight, big opportunity to take Maddalena out and steal all that hype, and suddenly you then become the fighter to be spoken about. But I think it's a missed opportunity for a lot of fighters. And Josiah Harrell, he's not a bad fighter. I've watched tape on him. He's scrappy, he's got some power on the feet, he's got a decent wrestling game, he's got a decent grappling game, he's really good in the back position as well. So he's got a really good sneaky back take, very quick. And once he gets his hooks in, he can flatten you out. He's got multiple finishes via KO, TKO from strikes in back mount position. So Harrell's definitely a fighter that I think is going to win some fights in the UFC. I think he's going to be entertaining moving forwards in the UFC. Of course, with him signing this fight, I'm sure he's going to have another 3 or 4 fights after this, or 2 or 3 fights after this, sorry. So, yeah, I think that it's a fight. Harrell's a fighter that is going to be one that we look forward to moving forwards. But for right here in this position, I just think it's an absolutely awful matchup. I'd be shocked if Harrell beat Jack Della Maddalena. I think that even Harrell's probably coming into this fight, excited and confident that he gets to put on a show. But after the first 60 seconds, 2 minutes in this fight, I think Josiah Harrell's going to realise that he's severely outmatched, and I think that's what we're going to get. Does Harrell take Jack Della Maddalena down? Maybe, you can never say never, but does he then scramble to the back, take his back, and then start, landing unanswered ground and pound with the back take like he's done with previous opponents? No, I don't think so. I think that Maddalena's probably got the wrestling advantage here. I think Maddalena could take Harrell down himself. Harrell does have a tendency to be taken down. And on the feet, I think it's just an insane mismatch. Jack Della Maddalena is one of the better boxers in the division. Yeah, it's a tough fight for Harrell. I'm really happy that he's been signed and he's got a contract and he can have a few more fights after this. But for UFC 290, it's a very tough task and a big mountain to climb. I'm picking Jack Della Maddalena to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. As always, thank you for tuning in, whether that's on YouTube or one of our podcast platforms, Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Music, whatever platform you are listening to. I always appreciate you tuning in and listening to the breakdowns. Of course, if you are listening on YouTube, you want to leave a comment, tell me who you're betting on, tell me where your predictions are at. Again, I say it every week. I know I am busy. I run 5 different businesses within the MMA space, so I am very stretched from a time perspective, but I do try my best to get back to the replies and the comments. So yeah, if you disagree with any of my picks and predictions, let me know which ones you're going for. If you're betting, then I hope you crush the bookies. And that's all for this week. I'm Newsome. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you again next week.